The Conclave fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel at exactly 0600 hours, Galactic Standard Time. 43 ships. Every one of them larger than anything humanity had ever put in space. They arranged themselves in a wide arc around the Kepler boundary checkpoint, slow, deliberate, like a hand spreading open before it closes into a fist. From Brower Station, the colonists watched on their monitors. Nobody spoke. A child in the observation deck pressed her face against the glass and counted the ships until she lost track. The lead vessel, a Conclave battlecruiser called the Sovereign Measure, opened a channel. Ambassador Urethkon spoke first. His translated voice came through flat and formal, the kind of voice that had rehearsed this particular speech many times in front of many mirrors. He said that the mineral territories surveyed in the Kepler 7 belt belonged, by ancient Conclave charter, to the sovereign Velhari people. He said that Brower Station had 48 hours to begin evacuation. He said that failure to comply would result in military annexation. He said he hoped this would not be necessary. Then the channel closed. On the station, Governor Len Parrish sat in his office for a long time. He was 61 years old, had lived on Brower for 20 years, and had a bad hip that he had been meaning to get looked at. He forwarded the message to Earth. Then he made a pot of coffee, because there was nothing else to do, and he drank it looking out at 43 alien warships sitting in the dark like a second set of stars. Earth's response came in 72 hours. Not a fleet. Not a delegation. Not even a long message with many official signatures. One ship. The UES Calhoun came in at a modest speed, no lights blazing, no dramatic entrance. It was a destroyer-class vessel. Compact. Functional. There was fresh paint on the port nacelle that was a slightly different shade from the rest of the hull, like a patch on an old coat. It took up its position roughly 40,000 kilometers from the Conclave fleet and sat there. Urethkon stared at his sensor display. He called his aide over. His aide looked at the display. They both looked at it for a while. Then Urethkon called Fleet Marshal Soreth. Soreth was a large creature, even by Velhari standards. He had fought 9 wars. He had a scar that ran from his upper left shoulder down across his chest that he never talked about. He looked at the sensor display without any expression on his face. He said, "That is a courier ship." Urethkon said, "It appears to be armed." Soreth said, "Courier ships are sometimes armed." Urethkon said, "Should we wait for the rest of their fleet?" Soreth thought about this. Then he said, "Yes. Send the ultimatum again." Perhaps they did not understand the first one. On the bridge of the Calhoun, Commander Dale Harmon read the ultimatum for the second time. He was sitting in his command chair with one boot propped up on the console edge, which his crew had long since stopped commenting on. He was a lean man, not especially tall, from a small town in Montana where the winters were long and the conversations were short. He had gray at his temples and a face that had been outside in bad weather more times than it had been inside. He read the ultimatum the way a man reads a bill he has already decided not to pay. He set it down. "Lorne," he said, without raising his voice. From somewhere below the bridge, Chief Engineer Lorne Cutler's voice came back through the intercom. "Sir. What's our fuel situation?" "Good enough." Harmon nodded once. That was the whole conversation. On the bridge, Lieutenant Commander Priya Voss was already watching all 43 Conclave ships on her tactical display. She was from New Orleans, and she had the kind of mind that processed numbers the way a musician processes sound, not one at a time, but all at once, in patterns. She had named her targeting systems collectively the choir, and she talked to them the same way a person talks to a dog they trust completely. She said, quietly, to nobody in particular, "Their formation is pretty." Ensign Callie Drum, who was 22 and on her first deployment and had not yet learned to pretend she wasn't excited, said, "Is that a good pretty or a bad pretty?" Priya said, "The kind of pretty that has gaps in it." Callie looked at her console and then back at Priya. "Should I be writing this down?" Priya said, "You should be watching." Harmon opened a channel to the Conclave fleet. He did not use his rank when he introduced himself. He said his name the way you say your name when you sit down next to someone at a counter and decide to be friendly about it. He said Brower Station was not going to evacuate. He said the mineral territories had been legally surveyed and claimed under Earth colonial charter. He said he was happy to discuss the legal particulars if the conclave wanted to send someone over to talk. He closed the channel. On the sovereign measure, Ureth Khan sat very still for a moment. Then he began typing his report. He wrote that the human courier vessel had responded to the second ultimatum with what appeared to be a counter-proposal. He wrote that the human commander's tone was unbothered. He searched his translator for the right Velhari word. The closest one was a word that described the stillness of an animal that has already made a decision and is simply waiting for the right moment to act on it. He used that word. He did not flag it as significant. He had never met a human before, and he assumed this was simply how humans talked. Soreth read the report. He set it aside. He told his fleet to hold position and wait. The human fleet would come. It always worked this way, a small vessel first, to test the water, and then the real force behind it. He had seen it before, with 3 different species. He understood the pattern. He did not understand that he was wrong about the pattern. 40,000 kilometers away, Lorne Cutler was in the engine room with his hands inside a manifold casing, talking to it under his breath the way he talked to all machines that were being difficult. He had been with the Calhoun for 11 years. He knew every sound she made, every shudder, every complaint. The port manifold had been cracked for 2 weeks, running at about 80%, and he had been nursing it along with the specific tenderness of a man who knows he is the only thing standing between a sick animal and total failure. Callie Drum appeared in the engine room doorway with 2 cups of coffee. She handed one to Lorne. He took it, sipped it, and his face did something complicated. She said, "Is it bad?" He said, "What did you do to this?" She said, "I made it. That's what I did to it." He drank it anyway. He always drank whatever was handed to him. It was a point of something, though he couldn't have said exactly what. Outside, through the hull, the conclave fleet waited. 43 ships, each one carrying hundreds of crew, each one built to operate as part of a coordinated whole, each one watching the single human vessel that sat in the dark and did nothing alarming and did not leave. Ureth Khan added one more line to his report before he went to sleep that night. He wrote, "The human ship is still here. Still not leaving. Waiting for what, I cannot say." He filed the report. He turned off his light. The Calhoun sat in the dark, quiet and patient, its mismatched nacelle catching no particular light from any particular star. 16 people. 1 ship. Good enough. 3 days passed and no second human ship came. Soreth stood at the viewport of the sovereign measure on the morning of the 4th day and watched the Calhoun sitting out there, same position, same quiet, and he felt something he had not felt in many years. It was not fear exactly. It was the feeling of a pattern refusing to complete itself. He had fought 9 wars. He knew how this worked. The small ship comes first, then the fleet comes behind it. That was the shape of things. That was how it always went. The small ship was still just the small ship. He called his senior officers together. There were 11 of them, representing 6 different conclave species, and they sat around the long table in the strategy room and talked for 3 hours. The conclusion they reached, at the end of all that talking, was this: they had waited long enough. It was time to remind the humans what 43 ships looked like up close. Soreth ordered 9 ships to form a forward demonstration squadron. Not an attack. A show. The kind of thing you do when you want someone to understand the nature of their situation without actually having to hurt them. In conclave military tradition, this maneuver had a name. It translated roughly as the open hand, a gesture of power that still left the other side room to back down with some dignity. The 9 ships began their approach. From the bridge of the Calhoun, Priya Voss watched them come. She had her coffee in her left hand and her right hand resting near her console with a light, comfortable posture, the way a pianist rests their hand near the keys before they start. She was watching the formation. She watched it the way she watched everything, completely, all at once, in patterns. It was a beautiful formation. She had to give them that. The 9 ships moved together like one organism, smooth and coordinated, and the geometry of it was genuinely impressive. She said, "Dale. Their left flank has a 4-degree angle gap between ships 3 and 4. Harmon said, "Show me." She pulled it up on his console. He looked at it for 5 seconds. He said, Sensor shadow. She said, the choir sees it. Harmon said, noted. He went back to watching. The 9 ships completed their approach formation and held position at demonstration range, close enough to be impossible to ignore, far enough away that opening fire would still be a deliberate choice rather than an accident. Soreth had planned it carefully. This was the part where the smaller vessel was supposed to begin moving backward. This was the part where the channel opened and someone on the other side said the words that led to a negotiated outcome. The Calhoun moved. Not backward. Lateral. 40 degrees to the left, at a speed that the conclave ships registered and then took a moment to process, because it was faster than their model suggested a vessel of that size should be comfortable moving. It put the Calhoun in a position that made no obvious tactical sense from the outside. From the inside, it made complete sense. Priya Vos knew exactly where she was going, because she had been watching that 4-degree gap since the formation started moving, and she had already told the choir exactly what she needed it to do. 2 shots. Precision suppression rounds, non-lethal, the kind designed to knock out propulsion without breaching a hull. They went through the gap between ships 3 and 4 like a needle through cloth. Ship 4 lost propulsion. Ship 6, catching the secondary wave off Ship 4's disoriented drift, lost its navigation array. No casualties. Not one. Clean as a line drawn with a ruler. The whole thing took 40 seconds. Soretha's fleet began the authorization process for a response. On the sovereign measure, the alert went out to the senior officers. The senior officers contacted the fleet commanders. The fleet commanders logged the incident in the tactical record and submitted a response proposal through the proper channels. The proper channels reviewed the proposal, flagged 2 procedural questions, received answers, and approved the response. 11 minutes had passed. The Calhoun had already moved again. Priya was sitting back in her chair now, coffee still in her left hand, watching the conclave fleet reorganize itself. She said, "They're pulling the damaged ships back." Harmon said, "Good." She said, "They're going to take it personally." He said, "Probably." Callie Drum, from her station, said, "Should I be doing something?" Priya said, "You're doing it." Callie looked at her station, which was currently showing her a lot of numbers, and decided that was probably true and went back to watching the numbers. Lorne's voice came through the intercom. He said, "I noticed we moved a little fast there." Harmon said, "We did." Lorne said, "Manifold's not going to love that long term." Harmon said, "How long term are we talking?" Lorne made a sound that was not quite a word. It was the sound a man makes when he is calculating something he doesn't entirely like the answer to. Then he said, "I'll get you another 3 hours. After that, we have a conversation." Harmon said, "Appreciate it." Lorne said something under his breath that was not quite a prayer and not quite a curse and went back to work. On the sovereign measure, Urethkon was standing in Soretha's strategy room watching the replay of the last 40 seconds on the tactical screen. He watched it 3 times. Then he said, very carefully, in the way a person chooses their words when they are not sure they have the right ones, "The human ship moved before we authorized the response." Soreth said, "Yes." Urethkon said, "How did the commander know to move before we responded?" Soreth said, "He saw the gap before we closed it." Urethkon said, "How long did it take him to see it?" Soreth looked at the tactical replay. In the replay, the Calhoun began its lateral move approximately 9 seconds after Priya's initial scan of the formation completed. 9 seconds from observation to action. No committee. No process. No authorization chain. Soreth said, 9 seconds. Urethkon said, "Our authorization process took 11 minutes. Soreth did not answer that. Urethkon said, slowly, "So for every decision the human commander makes, we are 11 minutes behind." Soreth walked to the viewport. He stood there looking out at the Calhoun. It was sitting in a new position now, one that Soretha's tactical officers had already noted made no sense by standard doctrine. They had filed a note about it. The note was currently in the review queue. He said, "The human ship is not behaving like a ship." Urethkon said, "What is it behaving like?" Soreth stood there for a long time. Then he said, "A person." He meant it the way you mean it when you say someone is unpredictable. When their next move is not a function of a system or a plan but of a single mind that has already looked at the board and decided something that nobody else in the room has figured out yet. He meant it as an observation. It came out sounding like something closer to a warning. Urethkon went back to his quarters that night and opened his translator and looked up the human military classification for the Calhoun's vessel type. He had been assuming it was a courier ship. He had written that in his first report. He found the actual definition now, under destroyer class, and he read it twice, and then he sat with it for a while. The definition talked about independent operation. It talked about a vessel designed to act alone, without fleet support, in high-risk engagements. It talked about the role of the commanding officer as sole decision-making authority. Sole decision-making authority. He closed his translator. He looked at the ceiling of his quarters for a long time. Outside, through the hull of the Sovereign Measure, one small human ship sat in the dark, patient as a man who has already decided what he's going to do next and is simply waiting for the right moment to do it. Urethkon opened a new document and began rewriting his report from the beginning. He had gotten some things wrong. He wanted to get the next part right. The conclave did not act for 14 hours after the demonstration failed. 14 hours. Soratha's fleet sat in its arc, all 43 ships perfectly still, while somewhere on the Sovereign Measure, in rooms that Urethkon was not invited into, decisions were being made by committee. He could track the general shape of it from his diplomatic feed, the proposals submitted, the counter-proposals, the procedural flags, the subcommittee reviews, the revisions, the resubmissions. It was a thorough process. A careful process. A process designed to ensure that no single officer could make a mistake that dragged 17 species into a war they had not agreed to fight. He watched it move and felt, for the first time in his career, that thoroughness might be its own kind of problem. On the Calhoun, those same 14 hours looked like this. Priya ran tactical simulations. Not because she was worried, but because she liked knowing things before she needed them. She ran 17 different scenarios based on what the Conclave fleet might try next, and in 14 of those scenarios she found something useful. She labeled her 3 best findings and put them in a file and called it windows because that was what they were, places in the Conclave's potential formations where the Calhoun could move through without being caught. She didn't tell Harmon yet. There was nothing to tell yet. She just put the file somewhere she could reach it fast. Callie Drum ate dinner in the mess hall with 2 other crew members and talked about nothing important. She was nervous in the way that 22-year-olds are nervous when they know something serious is happening and they have been told their job is to watch their console and not ask too many questions. She asked 3 questions over dinner anyway. The crew members answered 2 of them. Lorne Cutler went to sleep for 4 hours, which was all he ever allowed himself during an active situation. He slept the way he did everything, efficiently, without fuss. When he woke up he went back to the engine room and put his hands back into the manifold casing and continued the conversation with it that he had been having for 2 weeks. The manifold was being stubborn. It was, in Lorne's considered opinion, the most stubborn piece of machinery he had ever worked on in 30 years of working on machines, which was saying something, because he had worked on some absolute mules in his time. He talked to it. Not words exactly. More like a continuous low sound of negotiation. Harmon came down to the engine room at some point in the middle of the night. He didn't say anything when he arrived. He just stood in the doorway with his arms crossed and watched Lorne work. This was a thing Harmon did when he trusted someone. He came and watched. Not to check on them. Just to be present. Lorne had figured this out years ago and had stopped finding it strange. After a while Harmon said, "What are we looking at?" Lorne said, "Port manifold. Cracked. Running at about 73% since you decided to move us fast earlier." Harmon said, "I needed to move fast." Lorne said, "I know you did. I'm not arguing about it. I'm just telling you what we're at." Harmon said, "What do you need?" Lorne said, 2 hours and for nobody to bother me." Harmon said, "Done." He went back upstairs. Callie appeared in the engine room doorway 30 minutes later with 2 cups of coffee. She held one out to Lorne. He looked at it with the expression of a man preparing himself for disappointment and then took it and drank it. It was bad. It was impressively bad. It had the flavor of something that had heard about coffee from a distance and was doing its best. Callie said, "I found the good beans." Lorne said, Where did you find the good beans? She said, in the cabinet above the water recycler. He closed his eyes for 1 second. Then he said, those are Commander Voss's personal beans. Callie said, she said I could use them. Lorne said, she said that. Callie said, she said, and I'm quoting here, feel free, take whatever. Lorne said, she was being sarcastic. Callie thought about this. Then she said, I don't think I caught that. Lorne drank the rest of the coffee anyway. He handed her back the cup. He said, go watch your console. She said, it's not doing anything. He said, then watch it do nothing. That's also information. She left. He went back to the manifold. The 14 hours ended. The conclave had their strategy. Soratha's decision, approved by committee, reviewed, sanctioned, logged, was containment. All 43 ships would move into a full encirclement formation around the Calhoun. Not an attack. A cage. The mathematics of it were, as far as Soratha's tactical officers could calculate, airtight. There was no vector by which a single vessel could exit that formation without passing through weapons range of at least 6 ships simultaneously. It was, on paper, the end of the situation. The fleet began to move. It took 11 minutes per adjustment to coordinate 43 ships into the correct positions. But they had time. The Calhoun wasn't going anywhere. Sorath had been watching it. It had barely moved in 14 hours. He was comfortable that it would not move now. On the bridge, Priya watched the formation come together on her screen. She opened the file she had labeled Windows. She looked at her 3 best options. She updated their parameters as each conclave ship settled into its position. 2 of the windows closed as the formation tightened. Ships moving into new positions blocked the angles she had identified. The third one stayed open. It was not a comfortable window. It was the kind of window you look at and immediately understand why nobody is supposed to use it, a narrow corridor through the sensor-blind aft section of the Sovereign measure, the flagship itself, roughly 2 ship lengths wide, requiring high speed and extremely precise navigation to get through clean. By any standard doctrine it was not a move a rational commander made. It was the kind of move that existed on paper as a theoretical option that everyone agreed was not actually an option. Priya labeled it the one he'll pick, and sat back. Harmon came onto the bridge. He looked at the formation on his console for about 30 seconds. He said, tell me about the windows. She told him. All 3. She didn't editorialize. She gave him the numbers, the angles, the risk profiles. 2 closed, 1 open. She showed him where the open one was. He looked at it. He said, through the flagship's aft. She said, yes. He said, that's why it's still open. Nobody thinks we'll use it. She said, correct. From her station, Callie Drum said, are we doing that one? Her voice was very controlled for someone whose hands were visibly gripping the edge of her console. Harmon said, yeah. Then he said, Lorne. The intercom crackled. Lorne said, sir. Harmon said, I need full engine capacity in about 4 minutes. There was a pause. It was a short pause, but it was the kind of short pause that contained a significant amount of internal conversation. Then Lorne said, give me 3. The line went quiet. Somewhere below the bridge, in the engine room, Lorne Cutler finished the 2-week conversation with the manifold casing. He did not celebrate this. He just closed it up, ran his diagnostics, watched the numbers come back right, and said to no one in particular, there you go, you stubborn thing. Callie said, to Harmon, in a voice that was trying to be calm, I just want to say that I am very okay with this plan. Priya said, you are visibly not okay with this plan. Callie said, I am okay with it on the inside. Priya said, that's good enough. The formation finished assembling. 43 ships. A complete cage around 1 destroyer. Sorath looked at it on his screen and allowed himself 1 moment of quiet satisfaction. It was a good formation. He had built it carefully. Go, Harmon said. The Calhoun moved. 9 seconds. The corridor through the flagship's aft was 2 ship lengths wide, and the Calhoun went through it at a speed that triggered 3 separate collision alerts on the Sovereign measure before the Conclave tactical officers could confirm there had been no collision at all. The Calhoun came out the other side of the encirclement. Clean. No damage. Nobody hurt. The Conclave fleet began its authorization process to close the corridor. 11 minutes later, the corridor was closed. The Calhoun was already 40,000 kilometers away, holding position in the same quiet way it had been holding position for the last 4 days. Same posture. Same patience. Like it had simply stepped outside for a moment and come back. Soreth stared at his screen. His tactical officer said, "They're outside the formation, sir." Soreth said, "I can see that." His tactical officer said, "Should I submit a response proposal?" Soreth did not answer for a moment. Then he said, "Yes. Submit it." He walked to the viewport. He stood there, and he looked at the Calhoun, and he thought about a single commander on a single ship who needed nobody's permission to do anything, who looked at a cage made of 43 ships and found the one place nobody expected him to go and went through it in 9 seconds. He thought about 11 minutes. He thought about 9 seconds. Ureth Khan found him there an hour later, still at the viewport. He had not moved. His tactical officer had submitted the response proposal. It was still in review. Ureth Khan said, "I think we should talk about what we do next." Soreth said, "I think we should talk about what they are." Ureth Khan looked out at the Calhoun. Soreth said, "Not what their ship is. What they are. As a people. What kind of people send one ship?" Ureth Khan said, "I have been thinking about the same question." Neither of them had an answer yet. But they were starting to understand that the answer mattered more than any formation they could build. The emergency council session was not a military meeting. That was the first unusual thing. Soreth had called for it himself, which was unusual enough on its own. He was a man who believed that generals belonged in strategy rooms, not council chambers. But he had requested this session, and he had requested it not in the strategy room but in the full diplomatic chamber, with all senior delegates present. Ureth Khan arrived early and took his seat and watched the rest of the delegates file in, representatives of 17 species, and he tried to read the room the way he had learned to read rooms over 30 years of diplomacy. The room was unsettled. Not afraid. Not angry. Unsettled, the way people are when something has happened that doesn't fit any category they have for things that happen. Soreth stood at the front. He had no presentation prepared. He had no tactical display behind him. He had a single document on the table in front of him, which was Ureth Khan's revised report from the previous night. He looked at it and then he looked at the room and he said, "I have a question. It is a simple question and I would like an honest answer." Nobody said anything. Soreth said, "Why is there only one ship?" The room stayed quiet. He said, "This is not a tactical question. I am not asking how to respond to it. I am asking what it means. One ship. Against 43. They sent one ship and that ship has disabled 2 of ours, escaped a full encirclement, and is currently sitting outside our formation as though nothing significant has happened. I want to understand why they sent one ship. Not as a military problem. As a question about what kind of people these humans are." Ureth Khan spoke. He had spent most of the night preparing for this, though he had not known this exact meeting would happen. He had simply felt that the preparation was necessary. He stood and he said, "I would like to present what I have found." He had done research. Deep research, the kind that required going past the standard conclave files on humanity, which were thin and mostly concerned with humanity's territorial expansion and resource output, and into human historical records themselves. He had spent hours in those records. He had come out the other side of them with the feeling of a person who has opened a door expecting a small room and found something much larger on the other side. He said, "The vessel they sent is classified as a destroyer. In human military doctrine, a destroyer is not a support ship. It is not a courier. It is designed specifically for independent operation, meaning it is built to work alone, without fleet support, in dangerous situations. This is not an unusual vessel for humans. They have many of them." One of the council delegates asked how many. Ureth Khan said he did not have a complete number. He said the records he had accessed suggested the figure was significant. He moved on. He said, the crew of the Calhoun numbers 16 people. The room reacted. It was subtle, a shift in posture, a change in the quality of silence, but Ureth Khan had been reading rooms for 30 years and he felt it clearly. He said, a standard conclave warship requires, at minimum, 400 crew members for basic operation. This is because our vessels are built around a command structure that distributes decision-making across multiple officers and requires authorization at each level. This is a sound system. It has served us well across many conflicts. He paused. He said, Commander Harmon's vessel carries 16 people. 16 people who, between them, perform all the functions that 400 of ours perform. I have been trying to understand how this is possible, and the answer, as best as I can determine, is this: each of those 16 people is trusted to make decisions in their area without asking anyone for permission. Another delegate said, without any authorization. Ureth Khan said, the commander authorizes them. That is the structure. The commander authorizes his crew, and the crew acts. And the commander himself requires no authorization from above during active operations. He is the authority. Soreth, who had been standing very still, said, who reviews his decisions after the fact? Ureth Khan said, there are reporting structures. There is accountability. But in the moment of action, no one. He decides. He acts. The decision and the action are the same event. Soreth sat down. It was the first time, in Ureth Khan's memory, that he had ever seen Soreth sit down during a meeting that was still in progress. The chamber was very quiet. Outside, through the hull, 43 conclave ships sat in formation around nothing, because the thing they had been trying to contain had already left. Ureth Khan said, this is the core of what I want you to understand. Our system takes 11 minutes to authorize a tactical response. Commander Harmon's system takes 9 seconds. Not because he is faster or smarter than our officers. Because he does not need anyone's approval. The gap between 11 minutes and 9 seconds is not a technology gap. It is a trust gap. They trust their people differently than we trust ours. A delegate from one of the smaller conclave species, a cautious people, known for precise questions, raised a hand and said, if this is their doctrine for a single vessel, what is their doctrine for their full fleet? Ureth Khan pulled up a star map on the chamber display. It showed the known area of human space. He marked Brower Station. Then he began marking other points, 17 of them, spread across the map, each one indicating an active human military or colonial operation currently in progress. He said, the Calhoun is not a special assignment. According to the records I have accessed, this situation at Brower Station is classified by Earth's colonial authority as a border incident requiring standard response. Standard response, by their protocols, is one destroyer-class vessel. The rest of their fleet is engaged at these other locations. Nobody spoke for a long time. Ureth Khan said, we committed 43 ships, a substantial portion of the conclave's deployable military capacity, to what the humans have designated a low-priority border incident. They responded with the ship they had available. Not their best ship, necessarily. The ship that was available. Soreth looked at the star map. He looked at 17 other dots spread across it, each one representing a situation that humanity was handling the same way it was handling this one. With whoever was there. With whatever was available. With the quiet confidence of a people who had looked at a problem, decided what it called for, and sent exactly that. One of the senior delegates said, are we to understand that they are not treating this as a significant military engagement? Ureth Khan said, that is my understanding, yes. The delegate said, then what are they treating it as? Ureth Khan thought about how to answer. He thought about Commander Harmon reading the ultimatum and saying nothing dramatic. He thought about a ship moving in 9 seconds when every move the conclave made took 11 minutes. He thought about 16 people doing the work of 400, not because they were exceptional people, but because the system trusted them to be enough. He said, I believe they are treating it as work. A task assigned to available people, to be completed and then moved on from. This is not a war for them. It is a Tuesday. The chamber was so quiet that Ureth Khan could hear his own breathing. Soreth looked at the star map for a long time. Then he looked at Ureth Khan and he said, the question I should have asked at the beginning. Not why did they send one ship. What are the rest of their ships doing? Yureth Khan said, this. He indicated the 17 dots on the map. All of them, he said. Elsewhere. Doing this. The council member who had asked the first question said, in a voice that was very carefully not panicking, how many ships do they have total? Yureth Khan said, I do not have a confirmed number. The room understood what that meant. Sorith stood up. He was done sitting. He straightened to his full height, the scar across his chest catching the light, and he looked around the chamber at 16 delegates from 17 species who had come to this border to take a colony from a people they had considered a minor concern. He said, we are going to request formal negotiations. Nobody argued. Yureth Khan began drafting the message before he left the chamber. He had a lot of rewriting to do. His first report had described the Calhoun as a courier ship. His final report was going to be a very different document. He wrote carefully. He was going to get this part right. The message came through at 0800 hours. It was formal and carefully worded, the way messages are when many people have reviewed them before sending. It said that the Galactic Conclave, in the interest of peaceful resolution, was requesting formal negotiations between a Conclave representative and the commanding officer of the UES Calhoun. It said the negotiations would take place on the Sovereign Measure, the Conclave flagship. It said the Conclave would guarantee the safety of the human representative under all standard diplomatic protections. Harmon read it once. He set it down. Priya, from her station, said, they want you to go to them. To the flagship. Harmon said, yep. She said, alone. He said, probably. She said, you know there are 43 ships between us and that flagship. Harmon said, they're not going to do anything. Priya looked at him. She had a very specific look she used when she disagreed with something but had decided not to argue about it. She used it now. Then she turned back to her console. Callie Drum said, can I say something? Harmon said, go ahead. She said, going alone to the flagship of the fleet that has been trying to cage us for 5 days seems like a plan with some risk in it. Harmon said, it does. She waited for more. More didn't come. She said, okay. She turned back to her console. Lorne's voice came through the intercom. He said, I heard the message. You going? Harmon said, yeah. Lorne said, you want me to come? Harmon said, no. Lorne said, didn't think so. A pause. Come back. Harmon said, plan to. He took a shuttle across the 40,000 kilometers between the Calhoun and the Sovereign Measure alone. He sat in the shuttle bay with his hands on his knees and watched the flagship get larger through the front screen. It was an enormous ship. Long and dark and built with the kind of weight that was meant to communicate something, that the people inside it were serious, that they had resources, that they were not to be dismissed. He had been looking at it for 5 days now and he still thought it was impressive. He just didn't think impressive was the same thing as dangerous if the people inside it were currently asking to talk. They brought him to a large chamber near the center of the ship. The room was designed for meetings, a long table, seats on both sides, light that came from panels in the ceiling and was slightly too blue for human preference. Yureth Khan was already there. He was four-armed and tall and his skin had the deep greenish-gray color of someone who didn't spend a lot of time outside, wherever outside was for his people. He moved his upper arms in a pattern when Harmon came in, which the translator told Harmon was a gesture of welcome. Harmon nodded at him. He had seen the gesture in a briefing file. He knew it was genuine. Sorith came in a few minutes later. He was the largest creature Harmon had been in a room with. He moved with the slow, deliberate quality of something that had been a certain weight for a very long time and had made its peace with that weight. He looked at Harmon the way people look at things that surprised them and that they are now studying carefully to understand how the surprise happened. They sat. Yureth Khan handled the translation. The table between them was very clean and had nothing on it. Sorith said, thank you for coming. Harmon said, thanks for the invite. Sorith said, you came alone. Harmon said, same reason I came in one ship. The situation didn't call for more. Sorith considered this. He said, were you not afraid? Coming here alone. To our ship. Harmon looked at him. Not challenging. Just looking, the way a man looks at a question he wants to answer honestly. He said, of 43 ships. Sorith said, yes. Harmon said, no. Sorith said, what would you have been afraid of? Harmon thought about it. He was quiet for long enough that it was clear he was actually thinking about it and not just performing the pause. Then he said, letting Brower Station down. Sorith was still. Harmon said, the people on that station have been there for 20 years. They built something out there. The mineral survey is theirs, legally and by work. If I came here and said the wrong thing or did the wrong thing and those people lost what they built, that would have bothered me. That's the thing I didn't want to get wrong. Not the fleet. Not the 43 ships. Not his own life, sitting in a shuttle crossing 40,000 kilometers of space to walk into a room full of people who had been trying to force a surrender for 5 days. None of that was on his list. Just Brower Station. Ureth Khan translated this. He used, in Velhari, a word that described a kind of responsibility that comes not from rank but from something older and more personal. A word his people used for the feeling a parent has toward a child, or a builder has toward a structure they raised with their own hands. He was not sure if it was exactly right. It was the closest thing he had. Sorith was quiet for a moment. Then he said, we are withdrawing the ultimatum. The mineral territories at Brower Station remain under Earth Colonial Charter. No conditions. Harmon said, I appreciate that. Sorith said, Ureth Khan will file the treaty language. Harmon nodded. There was a pause. Not an uncomfortable one. The kind of pause that happens when the main business is done and two people are still sitting at a table and there is something else that one of them wants to say. Sorith said, may I ask you one more question? For my own understanding. Not for the record. Harmon said, go ahead. Sorith said, if we had come with more ships, everything we had, would Earth have sent more than one vessel? Harmon thought about it. He was quiet. He was honest. He said, probably 2. He said it simply, the way you state a fact that doesn't particularly need emphasis. 2, because the situation would have called for 2. Because that is what the situation would have been worth. He got up, nodded at Ureth Khan, nodded at Sorith, and left. Sorith stayed at the table for a while after Harmon left. Ureth Khan began organizing his notes for the treaty document. The chamber was quiet. Somewhere outside, through the hull of the Sovereign Measure, a shuttle made its way back across 40,000 kilometers toward a small battered ship with mismatched paint on one nacelle. Eventually Sorith stood and walked to the nearest viewport. It wasn't the best angle from this room, not the broad view of his usual viewport, but through it, if he waited long enough, he could see the Calhoun turning slowly and beginning its journey back toward Brower Station. Unhurried. Small. Moving through the middle of 43 ships the way a person walks through a crowd they have no particular feelings about. Ureth Khan came to stand beside him. Sorith said, I have been thinking about what this means. Ureth Khan said, what have you concluded? Sorith said, they do not send their best. They send whoever is available. And whoever is available is enough. Not because they are exceptional people. Because they trust their people to be enough. That trust is built into their structure. It goes all the way down to one man on one ship with 16 crew who can make any decision he needs to make in the time it takes to decide. He paused. He said, that is not a military strategy. That is a way of being. It is built into how they think of themselves and of each other. We have been trying to understand their tactics for 5 days. Their tactics come from something beneath tactics. Something we do not have in the same form. Ureth Khan said, what do you call it? Sorith watched the Calhoun until he couldn't see it anymore. He said, I don't have the right word for it in our language. Ureth Khan thought about the word he had used in his translation. The old Velhari word for the responsibility a builder feels toward what they made. He thought about Harmon saying Brower Station like it was the only thing on his list. He said, I think in human terms the word might be something like belonging. The feeling that the people you are responsible for belong to you, and you to them, and that is the thing worth being afraid of failing. Sorith said nothing. The Calhoun was gone from the viewport now. Just stars. Ureth Khan went back to his notes. He had a treaty to file and a report to finish and a very long message to send back to the Conclave's main council about what had happened here and what it meant for how the Conclave thought about humanity going forward. He wrote for a long time. When he was done, he added one line at the bottom, outside the formal structure of the report. In his own language, in the small careful script he used for private thoughts. The line said, "We should not do this again." He thought about it. Then he added one more line underneath. It said, "And we should think very carefully before we do anything that brings more than 2 of their ships to the same place at the same time." He closed the document. Outside, somewhere between the stars, a 16-person crew on a single battered destroyer flew home to Brower Station, which they had never been going to let down. That was the whole story. That was all it was. It was enough.